to another episode of Son of Elijah. My name is Mac the Lion, and I'm your host for this program. Today we're going to unveil and share something that is quite interesting. Some years ago, 2016 to be precise, I had a revelation. I had an encounter like I had never had before. In this vision, or in this visionary encounter, I was in eternity with the Creator of the heavens and the earth. I was standing beside, on the left-hand side of the Father. And in that vision, I wasn't existing as yet, because it was obvious that I had no specific or definitive shape yet. But yet I was life. I was alive, but it was spiritual. Now it was when I had gone through this encounter that I now understood what it was all about. Initially, I didn't totally comprehend what it was all about, because I've never had this type of vision before. Now I've had many encounters. I've gone to the throne room of God so many times I've lost count. I've had so many encounters, even visitations from specific angelic beings. You know, I've had visitations from the Archangel Gabriel, 2019 to be precise. I've had visitations from the cherubims and the seraphims. But this one was different, because for the first time I was in a revelatory experience, but yet I had no definitive shape. I couldn't look at my hands or look at my, there was something about it that was just different. But I was existing already. But that existence did not reflect yet on a physical sense of existing spiritually first, then of course physically. But I'll try and explain what I saw and the encounter, because this is very important, in some of the things we are dealing with today, because it has a way of affecting your mind if you pay very close attention. And the God who commanded that encounter for me wanted to give me a fresh and a new perspective to life, so that I can have an understanding of what exactly is going on. Now, in this vision, I stood by the left-hand side of the Father, and he was on the right, and he was talking to me. And in that vision, he was telling me the things I was to accomplish on the earth, what my purpose was, what my destiny will involve, the steps I will have to go through, the script I would have to follow. And he was literally explaining to me what my assignment was. At that time, I was still in eternity, so I had not actually existed as it is yet. Because you have to understand that we existed in God first as life, before God now breathed that very life into clay and now made man into a living soul by the breath of God. So when God created man was already existing in him, but God now had to form him. The formation part is the housing, which is his body. But I don't want to go too much into that, because I just want to stay close to the revelation so that we don't miss the gist and the core and the sweet spot of what I'm trying to share with us today. So what happened in that revelation was this. I was standing by the left-hand side, as I had mentioned, and he was telling me what my assignment was, what my purpose was, what he was calling me to accomplish on the earth, and my assignment, and the places I would do, and the nation I will be born, and even the Father that he had chosen for me specifically, why he chose him, and the generational blessing that I was going to gain as a result of being born by him. So there were a lot of things that were going into my existence, as it were. But then when he finished talking to me, then he gave me a book. Now that book was about the size of a novel, just about maybe 300-400 page novel. And that book contained everything I was going to be, my purpose, the assignment I was given, that which I was to do with my life, how I was to run with the vision, the things I was to do with it. All that was enumerated in this book. But when he gave me the book, immediately I opened the first page of the book. I looked to the left side, then I looked to the right side. As you know, when you open a book, the first page is not actually the page. It's almost like the introduction to the actual book. And on the left-hand side is usually like the inner part of the cover of the book. So when I looked on the right side, it was the introduction. Then I flipped, as it were, that page, which was not really a page, but it was just introduction. And when I opened the book properly to read what was written there, I noticed on the left-hand side there were 2 paragraphs containing an introduction to my personality. And by the time I looked to the right side of the book, I saw that it had 2 paragraphs, but the right side of the paragraphs, because the paragraph had the right and the left. So on the very extreme right side of that very first page of the book, there was written what my race was to be. Could you believe that? And I saw very clearly what was going to be my race. Now at that time I was still the very life of God, so I had not received housing yet, because your body is the housing for your spirit. Your spirit man is called the inner man, because the inner man dwells within the body. Then the soul, of course, is the breath of God that created the soul, and the soul actually is connected to your spirit on the inside. Then your body is connected to your spirit from the outside. That's the way it is. So without going too much into that, I was looking at the race. Now you have to understand that at that time I had not existed, so I don't know what it was all about, but at least I could enumerate what those words were. I could make sense of it. I could actually read what the characters were. And it was a 3-letter a word that was written there. And I was looking at this race. And this was the race I was to be a part of, which of course is not unique to me, but it's unique to everyone who was going to be given this particular housing. And I will tell you what that race was, or what that race is. And it was written a 3-letter word. And the word is T is the first character I saw, A is the second character, and the third is N. T-A-N, which is the word tan. So my race was that I was going to be a 10. Now, when I had come out of the vision, now I know what a word tan, I know the word tan, I know what it is, because I know that it has something to do with brown, but I did not totally understand in the context of that revelation and that encounter what tan was. So when I was looking at it, I looked to the Most High who had given me this book, and I asked him, I said, how do you intend to achieve this race? How do you intend to achieve this color? And he told me, he said, I will get yellow sun to shine on red skin, and it will produce this tone and this color and this race. That's what he said to me. Now, the word tan means brown, because even when I came out of that revelation, I went to check again and I saw that the word tan meant brown. Now, there are people that, you know, they go to saunas, they go to the beach, and they tan themselves by exposing themselves to the UV rays. So naturally, I would almost assume that the word tan had a lot to do with that. But the word tan wasn't all about that. It was just a word that meant a tone and a color, and that was brown. And I asked the creator of the heavens and the earth, what is that color and how would it be achieved? And he told me that he was going to get the yellow sun to shine upon the red skin, and it will produce this color. So I later now discovered clearly, because after I came out of Revelation, I looked into it and I saw that to be the case. For you to have the color brown, you mix the color yellow with the color red, and it will produce brown. Now, the red skin he was talking about was the first man he created, being Adam. You see, the word Adam actually means red man because he was formed from the very clay of the earth. And the clay of the earth is reddish in color. So, and that was also what gave him the tonality of his blood, which is where his life is, because the life of the body is in the blood. And the blood took its tonality from the very red soil from which Adam was formed. So Adam actually was a red man. He wasn't a white man. He wasn't any other tone. He wasn't a black man. He wasn't a brown man. He was a red man because of the tonality of the redness of the soil from which he was formed. So he was a red man. Now, in today's standard, we look at the red man as like the Red Indians, as a group of people who you can classify as a red man. But I'm sure when Adam was made, he was much redder than that, because he was very close to the very tonality of the soil from which he was formed. So when God breathed into him the very breath of life, which is also in it is the very spirit of the man, man became a living soul, because that breath created his soul or his consciousness, and his spirit man became lodged within the housing of that body. Now, the red man in combination with the yellow sun will produce the tan man. So technically, I am not actually a black man, because that is contrary to what I saw. God wanted to show me clearly that I wasn't black technically, that I was just a dude with a tan, if I may just put it like that. See, you have to understand where I'm coming from without trying to be sarcastic or any funny thing. You have to understand where I'm coming from, because he was trying to make it very clear to me that it was just a construct, a social construct that people came up with and said, this is white. I've never seen anyone who's actually white color. Neither have I seen anyone who's actually black color. I've never seen anyone like that. You know, I don't know whether you've bumped into any, but I've not. So we call a certain race of people who are Caucasians white. We call a certain race of people who have melanin in their composition. We call them black. Then all the in-betweens, we have the yellow, which is more like the Asians, like the Chinese. And then we have the brown tone, which at times these days now is even attributed to people from the Mediterranean and all that, all the way down to the Spanish and the Portuguese and all that. So all these racial inclinations at times are designed by men in order to classify us. Now, of course, God is a God of variation, and God who created us wanted us to be unique, but at the same time variegated by our ethnicity and our culturality. So now let me explain to you how it actually happened. When God created man, he formed him from the soil of the earth. The first man is a red man because the soil was richly red. Now, that first man who was formed was placed in the garden, and he had a primary assignment to label, to name, to do everything he was sent to do originally. But eventually, when man sinned, man fell from that grace and glory. Then man was chased or moved out of the Garden of Eden. And as man began to multiply, because he said, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. So man started replenishing the earth. Man started fleeing up everywhere. And as they did that, they started migrating. So some went to the northern hemisphere. Some went to the southern hemisphere. Some went to the western hemisphere. So gradually, man started saturating the earth systematically and gradually. Now, for those of them who traveled towards the north and ended up in the colder climatic regions of the earth, the Arctic region, their skin became more exposed to the environment and the reflection of the snow and the coldness and the icy, terrain and all that. And gradually, their skin started turning white. Their skin started looking lighter. Their tone started reflecting more of their environment as a result of that. Why? Because you see, as humans, our skin our body came from the soil, and because we came from the soil, we're a product of the soil, and the soil is heavily affected by the weather. So the weather actually changes us or adapts us. That's why the number one conversation on the earth is talk about the weather. When people get into lifts, when people run into people, they don't even know. If there is one safe conversation they normally start with, is the weather. Why? Because the weather naturally affects us by the fact that we were formed from the very soil of the earth. And because we're formed from the soil of the earth, the weather, the climatic conditions of our surroundings affects and highly impacts us. In short, we are almost never at ease or in a place of leisure or pleasure when we cannot control the climatic environment we find ourselves around, when we have not adapted the environment into such a way where we find ourselves extremely comfortable to be. So as humans, our body is highly affected by that. So those who move to this northern hemisphere started adapting gradually, because the snow, the reflection, also the weather was very cold, also because the body has to find ways to conserve the heat that it gains, because it's giving out so much heat based on the fact that it's cold, especially during the temperate climate or the Arctic timeline. Within that timeline, the body now struggles to keep heat. So in order to do that, the body had to start adapting. So one of the things that happened was that those in those colder regions, their nose started growing a bit longer and thinner to adapt to the fact that they needed to take in oxygen, burn that oxygen to carbon dioxide, but at the same time hold it in a bit so that they can be able to have warmth and hold back a bit of the heat and not just dissipate it at the speed it came in. So systematically, for them to be able to adapt to that, their noses, their nostrils, their nasal cavity had to adjust and had to adapt to that weather, to that climatic condition. You see, for example, we have the polar bear, we have the brown bear, and we have the black bear. These three types of the bear are actually the same. They all came from one ancestral line. They are all created as the bear. But what happened was that systematically, they started adapting to their environment. Systematically, they started adapting to their environment. The bear started adapting to its environment based on the fact that the bear in itself had to climatically adjust to the environment that it found itself. It was very normal and it was very natural for it to be able to survive in the terrain it found itself. So the polar bear needed to hunt in the icy region, needed to also blend, it needed to hunt for seals, it needed to eat blubber so that it can have warmth for its body. So in order for it to survive, its body had to adapt. So the snowy situation in its environment now caused that Arctic bear or polar bear to start changing its climatic wool in order for it to reflect the tonality of its environment. And over time, it became white. That's why the Arctic fox is also white. That's why the Arctic wolf is also white. The reason is because all these animals all came from the same line of the ancestral original wolf, original fox, original bear. But what happened was that over time, they started adapting. And the adaptation was as a result of their environment in order for them to survive. So because they were also formed from the very earth, because just as man, they had to also adapt, and they are heavily affected by the climate. The climatic impact on each of these animals made those animals to be able to adapt in order for them to reflect the exactness of what they bore or what they are, so that they can be able to survive the harshness of the weather. Now, the bear that was living in the wild open oceans, eating the salmon, eating the berries and all that, that one became the brown bear. It's more adaptive to the environment because the environment is more brownish than the ones that are more in the rocky areas of the mountains and the high places started becoming darker to adapt better. You see, these animals adapted to the environment. The same with every single creature. If you go, for example, a man gave an example of how he visited a place called the Mount of Gibraltar, and he said as he was ascending through the mountain, the higher he went, his guide was showing him clearly the monkeys. And then they got to a certain altitude, all the monkeys, they had no tails. Now the monkeys they encountered at the foot of the mountain all had tails. But what happened was this. So this guide explained to him, you see, all of them are one ancestral monkey. But as the monkeys multiplied, more and more came into the scene, and gradually they needed to cover the terrain because they all couldn't live together because they were too much fight and squabbling. As the monkeys started to expand and saturate the territory, some of them started climbing into the higher terrains. And as they did systematically, what happened was that the coldness of the height started affecting them. Now, the ones with the longer tail originally on the ground needed it because the long tail is like the fifth arm of the monkey, so it uses it to catch branches and swing from it. So now, but as they started going into higher terrains, the trees started disappearing, and gradually there were no trees for them to swing on. And to add to that, it started getting cold, and now during the frigid weather, the tail will freeze up until it eventually breaks off. And when it eventually breaks off, then now it doesn't need it anymore. Now, in the next generation of monkeys that the next ones will be born, they will all arrive with little or no tail. Why? Because their genetic DNA composition has already received message that we don't need the tails because the last one were broken off by the frozen tip of the ice. And so as a result of that, we will not require it. So they adapted to the environment that was treeless in order for them to be able to function. The same thing with elephants. Elephants that are found in India and that part of Asia had smaller ears because the weather there is a bit more moderate. But the elephants that are in Africa, where the weather is really, really hot, they really need to cool down. And you see when the blood pumps through their whole body, it comes through the ear, and it goes through the capillaries and goes through the veins and circles his way back through the whole body. So when he gets to the ear is flapping very hard and it's cooling down. So the temperature affects the coolness of the blood and it takes down the cool blood all the way back through the body, and the body is able to adapt and function better. So that's why the elephants there grew bigger ears in order for them to cool better based on the climate. This is how humans are. This is how animals are. You see, animals and humans, we adapt. We do not evolve. We cannot evolve. If evolution is garbage, it doesn't make any identifiable sense. It can't add up. It's not possible. You can't be a lizard in 1,000 years ago, and in the second 10,000 years, you are now a millipede or something else crazy, or you are now a penguin, or you are now an ape. And from an ape, see, I don't have a problem with Charles Darwin saying his father and his great-grandfather are monkeys. If that is what he believes, I don't have a problem with that. That's his problem. My problem is you saying my own great-grandfather is a monkey or an ape. No, I can't have that. No, I'm sorry, I can't, because I was created by the very intelligence of the intelligent one, the awesome creator who created the heavens and the earth. And everything that conforms or makes up who I am is articulately given me, both in personality, in character, in functionality, in gifts, in abilities, in capacity, intricately for me to accomplish an assignment, reach a purpose, reach a goal, fulfill a destiny, and reach the fullness of that which I am being created for, so that I can maximize my existence and accomplish the purpose for which I was placed on the earth. Now, you have to understand this. Now, if you come down to the individuals, another group who spread it out and went to the equator. The equator is where the centrality of the tropics are. And in the tropics, we have high level of rain and massive sunlight. Now, because there is extraordinary sun with also a lot of fountains and rivers, so the humidity is very high. So for that, the body now had to adapt. First of all, it had to find a way to adapt to the strength of the UV rays, because now being in the equator means you are right center point of the hotness of the sun, and the UV rays can be damaging to the human skin. So the body had to adapt, and that adaptation meant that it generated melanin, a pigmentation designed to be able to screen and deflect the strength of the UV rays so that it's not so harmful to the human skin. And now it found a way to embed that melanin into the skin, into the hair, into the eye tissue, and every functionality of the human drapery. And as a result of that, the darker skin now emerged. It didn't also stop there. Because of the humidity of the weather, and also coupled with the fact that it also very hot, so the body had to find a way to cool down very fast. So when it takes the draw or the drag of the air and breathes in, it has to quickly send oxygen through the system all the way to the consciousness of the brain, while simultaneously cooling down and quickly pushing out the carbon dioxide, because it cannot retain that heat, not at all, so that it can take in fresh oxygen again. And by so doing, the body now started adapting. Then the nose started growing wider, started growing sideways, so that it can be able to pull in a lot of air, take in a lot in that very humid weather, hot weather, take it in very quickly, cool the body down, and at the same time provide oxygen for the consciousness of the mind. That's how the man with the tan adapted. And based on what God told me that day, he said he would get the yellow sun to look upon red skin and produce the tan or the brown. And that's exactly what happened. Now, of course, we have different variation of the tonality of the brown. We have those who are of the lighter yellowish brown, which is more attuned to those who live in Central and West Africa. Then we have places like in East Africa, where the tonality of the brown, it's a bit of a different shade. Or you go a bit upper down to places like South Sudan, where even they have the blue blacks, or what we call the blue tonality of the brownness. So it's a very, very chocolatey, exotic tonality, very beautiful to behold when you think about it, especially when it has a backdrop of, clean white teeth and all that. It reflects so beautifully. And now these individuals, interestingly enough, also live in the place where the source of the Blue Nile is, because the water from the Blue Nile, because of the richness of the alluvial deposits of the mountains and the deposits of all the volcanic activities that occurred there for a very long time, the water that comes from the mountains in South Sudan and places like that are off the Blue Nile. And systematically and gradually, that actually also shows up in the tonality of the skin. So for those who moved to the equator, to where the climatic conditions were very harsh with the UV rays and also with the humidity and the fact that also it was very hot, systematically and gradually the body had to adapt. And that adaptation meant that it had to generate melanin to protect it against that, and of course embed it into the DNA, even into the eye tissue, the hair follicles and every other thing, then embed it into the DNA so that when the next generation is giving birth, they don't have to regenerate all over again the melanin, but now it's baked into the DNA. So now down through their generations, they can now have that tonality, and that's able to protect them. Then their nose is able to also be able to dump a lot of air very quickly and bring in fresh one in order for them to maintain consciousness. So all these things you are seeing that is occurring all over the planet is a direct functionality of the adaptation of the human body in order to adapt to the climate, acclimatize to what the environment is presenting to it, so that it's able to function, so that it's able to operate, so that it's able to survive. So when Charles Darwin came up with that nonsense theory claiming that man actually evolved from apes, he was talking unadulterated garbage, because it doesn't make any sense. Literally, we can't change our innate DNA composition to move from a different line of species and jump to another just because someone is trying to make sense of his own existence. No, he's corrupt and his mindset is filled with nonsense. That is not the truth. The truth is that we're created by God by the blood of one man, as the scripture says, but now we now start started breaking up into different races based on the adaptation of the environment that we found ourselves. So as we migrated, as we moved from one place to another, systematically we started adapting to that environment, and over time we became more adapted to that environment for our survivability, and that's how the races became what it is. It was God that created it so that the variation of the ethnicity and the uniqueness is there. And it's scriptural. The Bible says in the book of the Songs of Solomon, that man said, I am one of you, I'm one of my brethren. The only problem is that I've been working in the open grounds and the sun has looked upon me, and as a result of that I have picked up pigmentation and I'm now darker than my siblings. So it looks like as if I'm not part of that paternity, like as if I'm not part of that genealogy, but I'm actually part of them. The only difference is that I'm a worker of the open fields and the sun has looked upon me. So that's it. So that means the sun actually is responsible for the melanin that has been baked into our DNA, and as a result of that we are better preserved from the harshness of the environment and the climate. You see, we're a product of the geology from where God formed us, so that's why we are also affected and highly vulnerable to the weather. Now I have been able to make some sense because I know that this vision was shown me for a reason. God gave me this encounter so that I will know that my race, my background, my purpose was aesthetically and exceptionally crafted by his idea. So at the end of the day, that tonality reflects my environment, my survivability and adaptability, and so that mentality and functionality will even be maximized, knowing that I'm unique based on that inkling rather than a social construct that someone just ran away with. And now today there are people who literally make their living off getting the whole world to understand that there are divisions. So I hope I have been able to give you something today on Son of Elijah. If you did enjoy it, please give us a thumbs up. Please also share it so that others can also listen to this, so that they can also know. Now, not everyone is 10, but I am 10. That's just what it is. That's what God showed me. That's the race I am, and I am 10. So I'm just sharing that for those of us who feel somewhat somehow simply because of what our world has presented it, and how there are people who are sowing so much division so that they can harvest it and continue to push their demonic agenda. So thank you for listening to this program. Thank you for enjoying it. Please do share. Please do subscribe, so every time we upload a new episode, you would immediately be notified. Thanks for everything, and please do stay blessed. My name is Mac the Lion, and I'm out. Bye.